Everybody, we're going to do something a little different. Obviously, this city, this state went through a horrible shock last night, and I want to speak to that up front. And if you have any questions, I want to take them up front, and then we'll go into the press conference that we plan to have about fight against crime in the city. But what we saw yesterday evening was absolutely disgusting. The Attorney General of our state accused of doing things that no one should ever do, let alone someone involved in law enforcement. And I think, like so many people in this city, first hearing, there was an article, and then when I finally was able to break from my schedule and read the article, I was horrified. And page after page, it got worse and worse and worse, and it was horrifying, and it was disgusting, and it was unacceptable in every way. And the only thing that bore any truth from the Attorney General was the statement he had made in the past about this being a moment of reckoning in our country. That's still true. It's a moment of reckoning, and now the reckoning has come to him. No one can do this to another human being. You can't abuse people. You can't harass them. You can't use your power against them. You can't threaten them. You just can't do that. No one can do that. And people sworn to uphold the law, especially, are held to the highest standard. So it was just as disturbing as it possibly could be. And thank God he resigned quickly and didn't put the state through a nightmare. But the most important thing here is brave women came forward and told the truth. And their stories were honestly so troubling because they felt threatened. They felt that they would be made vulnerable by telling the truth instead of feeling that they knew they would be supported. And this is something that this moment of reckoning has to lead us all to, an atmosphere in which anyone, by the way, women who are so often the targets of this harassment and abuse, but sometimes it's men as well, that whoever the victim is, that they can come forward and know they will be believed and supported. And I want to say to anyone who was victimized by the Attorney General and has not yet come forward, please do come forward to the NYPD. And rest assured you will be believed and that the information will be important to protecting others and will be important because it is part of breaking this chain where people feel they can't speak up. We have to, in this moment in history, once and for all, affirm the notion that anyone who has been victimized can speak up, should speak up, will be supported and believed when they speak up. So that's what I just wanted to say to reflect on what was one of the most painful and unusual few hours I think any of us have ever experienced in public life in this city and state. With that, I want to just welcome your questions on this, and then we will go back to the press conference as planned. Yeah, Aaron?
I know this all unfolded very quickly last night, but is there any reason Governor Cuomo and some other folks were calling for him to resign? You didn't say anything, before he actually resigned or until now. Is there any reason you didn't request his resignation?
I wanted to read the article, and by the time I got through doing other things and got to reading it, and I was horrified by it, and literally very soon thereafter he had resigned. I also wanted to try and say something bigger about what was happening here, and this was obviously the setting to do it, but it happened very, very quickly, obviously. Marcia?
I wonder, Mr. Mayor, if you will be asking the police commissioner...
Say again?
I wonder if you'll be asking the police commissioner to have the sex crime team interview these women and to contemplate charges to be brought.
I want to just state the obvious and pass the commissioner. This should now be handled like every other allegation we want, a full investigation we want. Everyone who knows anything about it to come forward to the police, but take it from there.
Yeah, I read the article last night as soon as it was posted. These are very serious allegations. Dermot Shea, new chief of detectives, had a discussion with Cy Vance this morning. We're going to get our investigative game plan going forward and make sure we contact the people identified in the article and make sure there's a full investigation of these, as I said, very serious allegations.
Please.
Sure.
Governor Cuomo raised some questions today about whether Cy Vance was the right place for this investigation to be, because at the time the Attorney General was investigating Cy Vance's handling of the Harvey Weinstein case. Are you both comfortable with the fact that the investigation be handled by the Manhattan District Attorney?
Yeah, at this time we are. We're comfortable with working with Cy's office to investigate these allegations. Yes.
Commissioner, had you received any complaints from any of these women out in person with them?
Yeah, no one's filed any complaint reports yet.
Okay, Gloria.
Mr. Mayor, same question following up on what Marcia asked. I just wondered if you believe it's appropriate for Cy Vance to be leading the investigation, considering the Attorney General had asked Jim was investigating him over the Weinstein allegations. So can you just speak to that obvious conflict there, and if you think he should be in charge of that?
Not being a lawyer, I do not have a specific sense of the legal issues involved and whether that would be a concern. I will follow the lead of Commissioner on this. The most important thing is that there is a fast and thorough investigation. Yes.
You mentioned wanting an environment where women feel safe to come forward with these allegations. I'm just wondering, in that context, do you also not see a value in someone such as yourself speaking out perhaps a little bit more quickly about the event once you were aware of it?
I needed to read the article, and that was the right thing to do. And again, by the time I did, it was essentially the time when he resigned. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, there's been a report that Alicia Glenn may want to run for Attorney General. Do you think that's a good idea? Would you support her, or do you have?
I think we need to, again, I have not had that conversation with her. She certainly has not indicated that to me. But we're less than 24 hours after a horrific event, and I think we all, all of us in public life need to step back and, for a moment now, sort of regroup and think about what this means. It's a horrible, painful episode, especially for the women who were victimized, but for the whole state. So I'm not going to speak to successors just yet. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, based on the charges, the allegations set forth in the New York article which you said you read, do you think that Mr. Steinman should face charges?
Based on what I've read, yes.
Could Mr. Schneiderman face criminal charges for the police commissioner?
Listen, we have to. These are real serious, very serious allegations, and again, working in conjunction with the Manhattan DA's office, that'll be part of the investigation to see if and what charges Mr. Schneider, if and what charges he'll face. I'm not going to speculate about charges.
Okay, let's do these two. Go ahead, first, Bridget.
There's been some concern, as people said, raised about DA Cy Vance's office investigating it, and the National Organization for Women in New York, Sonia Osorio, has said that she thinks a special prosecutor should be assigned to this case for the investigation. Is that something you would be open to, given the conflict that exists for Vance's office?
Well, again, I am aligning to the commissioner's point that right now it's assigned to the DA's office, and that needs to proceed. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't have a view of the intricacies, but I think all options should be on the table. Let's see what happens with this immediate one.
Kellyanne Conway and Donald Trump Jr. took to Twitter in the aftermath of the report to criticize Eric Schneiderman over the physical abuse allegations. What do you make of that in light of the fact that the president has been accused of sexual misconduct?
I find it troubling. What I don't understand in all this is what happened, what came out last night, again, could not be more troubling and disgusting and unacceptable. But at the same time, we have the President of the United States who's been accused by numerous women of harassment and abuse, and there's never been an investigation. Something's profoundly wrong with that. So I've not seen their tweets, but more to the point, I don't understand in this moment of reckoning how the one person who has not gone through an investigation is Donald Trump when there are numerous allegations from numerous individuals. So we shall see. All right.
Can I just ask you one
Yeah.
quick last question? I know you're not going to give us a name, but can you speak to just the general process now of nominating another person? Do you think that there should be a placeholder candidate?
It's just too soon. I have not digested, the next steps yet. Give me a few days and I'll speak to that. All right, let's go.
The Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman, for a long time. Did you have any indication that anything like this was happening?
Of course not. Okay, we're going to go back to the matter at hand.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. You're going to hear from Mayor de Blasio again after I get done speaking. And then for her first appearance as our new Chief of Crime Control Strategies, Lori Pollack will go over the April crime figures for you. And then we'll take your questions. Dermot, I don't think you have any specific cases you want to talk about, but I'm sure we'll cover something in Q&A. First, I want to say congratulations to Lori and Dermot and to Phil Walczak, our new DCPI, who many of you have already met. With yesterday's promotions and appointments, I think we're really in a good place in terms of some great minds in the right positions at the NYPD executive level. I'm highly confident that as we move ahead, both as an organization and as a city, we'll continue to make solid headway against the pockets of crime we will see. And last week, we did have some pockets of violence that we saw. We saw out in the 7th-3 in Brownsville. We had some issues, some challenges up in the Bronx, but working with Jeff Madry, with the people in Dermot Shop, Chief of Detectives, we're going to move as quickly as possible to make sure that we push down the violence in Brownsville and up in the Bronx. We also have to continue to strengthen trust and build on those all-important relationships our cops are fostering the people they serve each and every day in every neighborhood in each of the 5 boroughs. And from my heart, I want to thank those of you who made the trip out to Orange yesterday to the Kessler Institute to witness what I consider a miraculous event, and it truly was. Detective Dalshveve heading home from the Kessler Institute for Rehabilitation. Last June, I think I know Terry and everybody else from the executive staff and the mayor wasn't a lot of optimism about his recovery. What he's and his family and Kessler and KCH, Kings County Hospital, have managed to accomplish over the last 11 months is nothing short of a miracle. Dalsh still has a long way to go, but there is recognition there. That's something we did not see in the beginning. I got a thumbs up from him yesterday. He gave me a salute. He knew who I was. And as you see, when he was being wheeled out of the hospital by Esther, his wife, holding on to his three-year-old daughter, Dashi, I think everybody that was there really felt that moment. I know it moved me. This is a guy that was out there doing his job, doing his best to protect the people of the city and the people that live and work in the 6-7. And what happened to him should happen to no cop, should happen to no person. So, as we move forward, I would just hope that you keep track of his progress, let people of this city know what's happening to him, that we don't forget about him, and we won't. I know the people sitting up here and the 54,000 people that work for the NYPD won't forget about him, but here's a man that's got a long road ahead of him, and I wish him and his family all the best, and we're going to do all that we can to fully support him. An amazing progress he's made in less than a year. I also want to thank Dr. Neil Jassy. He works at Kessler, and his staff, how they treated Dalsh, and quite frankly, how they treated his whole family, and how they treated the men and women from the 6-7 who went there each and every day. Inspector Joe Galata was out in Jersey yesterday. I want to thank him. He's the former CO of the 6-7 and the current CO of the 6-7. Elliot Colon came out also with many people from the 6-7 precinct. Elliot was promoted to full inspector yesterday, but he thought it was important enough for him to come out to Orange and see Dalsh get released from the hospital. So I know he's going to continue to get better, and I know we're going to be thinking about him and his family each and every day. So I'll turn it over to the mayor now. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And I want to just echo this part of what the Commissioner said. Detective Dalshveve, extraordinary human being. This recovery is almost unbelievable. I visited with him and his wife in the rehabilitation facility several months ago, and there was hope, but the notion that this soon he would be able to salute the police commissioner and know everyone and talk is just absolutely astounding. So it's so encouraging, such a good man, such a distinguished officer, to see him coming back. And his wife, Esther, deserves a lot of credit in this because she has been absolutely persistent and focused in supporting every piece of the recovery, but also she's been the voice of hope. I think a lot of us felt sometimes a little sad when we were around him, and she was always the positive person who said, no, he's going to pull through. He's going to pull through, and she was right. So tremendous credit to her, and so good to see him going home, and just a powerful, beautiful New York story, his life, you know, child of immigrants who did so much to help this city, and now this city owes him a great debt of gratitude, and we need to stay by his side. I also want to echo what the Commissioner said about the important promotions and changes in the leadership that have occurred. It's a fantastic team. I want to commend all the leadership at NYPD up here, but a special congratulations to Dermot Shea as our new Chief of Detectives. A special congratulations to Lori Pollock as our new Chief of Crime Control Strategies. And I had a great opportunity to spend some time talking to Lori about the role, and I'm so impressed by the way she thinks and what she's done in her 31 years on the force and her commitment to this police force in this city. So a great step to have her in this role. And Phil Walczak, he's a pretty good guy too. So congratulations to him as the new DCPI. I also want to thank our partner in this work, Chair of the Committee on Public Safety, Donovan Richards. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for all the work we're doing together. So the NYPD continues to innovate, continues to work even harder to drive down crime, and month after month, we've seen extraordinary progress. This April just passed was the safest April we've ever had. And I want to say it again. This April just passed was the safest April we have ever had. And we know not every month is going to be perfect. And we know we've had a tough few days now at the beginning of May. But the sustained progress is outstanding and speaks volumes. So for the month of April, April 18 versus April 17, overall index crime down almost 4%. For the third straight month, we saw a decrease in shootings, and that's down almost 28% April 18 versus April 17. And, you know, we had a record year last year. We're still ahead of pace this year compared to last year. Again, at the end of April, year-to-date, overall, again, overall index crime down almost 4%, murders down over 9%, shootings down almost 11%. So, you know, we keep saying that we can go farther, and we keep proving it's possible. I want to give all my thanks to men and women of the NYPD. 2017 was the safest year on record since Harry Truman was president. We want to see what history we can set in 2018 and keep going farther to keep the people of the city safe. And I also want to say I understand this work is always tough for our officers, but I really believe more and more they have allies and friends in every community. Neighborhood policing is helping everyone to support each other. And I think this is going to something that's going to grow and grow over the coming years. Just a few words in Spanish. El NYPD continúa llevando el crimen a niveles históricamente bajos en toda nuestra ciudad. Acabamos de tener el mes de abril más seguro en los registros modernos de la Policía de Nueva York. Gracias al plan policial vecinal, el NYPD y las comunidades están trabajando juntos para que nuestra ciudad sea aún más segura. With that, I want to turn to our new Chief of Crime Control Strategies, and again with a warm congratulations to Lori Pollock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon. As I get the baton passed to me from Chief Shea, I'd like to say overall index crime in April is down 3.8%. That is a decrease of 285 crimes. April does set another record month for this department. This April's 7,199 index crimes breaks last year's record low for April of 7,484. Our murder, we saw a slight uptick, 22 versus 21 for April. Shooting incidents down an incredible 49 from 68 last year in April. To give some perspective, 49 shootings are half the shootings we had in April 2012, only 6 years ago, when there were 98 shootings. Rape is up 44.5%. Robbery, another great month. For the first time ever, we were below the 1,000 mark for robbery this April, with 900 compared to 1,050 last year. Felony assaults are flat, 1,556 versus 1,556. Burglaries down slightly, 1.8%, 905 versus 922. Our grand larcenies are also down 6.4%, 3,241 versus 3,462. We see a slight uptick in our auto thefts. They're up 49, 13.8%, and our arrests continue to decrease, but our index crime arrests are up for April, 2%. So, thank you.
Yep. All right, any questions? We could take some questions about the crime report first. Ashley?
Chief Collins, can you go over the rate numbers you mentioned? They were up 4.5%. Can you tell us the numbers and what they mean?
They were actually up 44.5%, 172 versus 119, so that would be 53 reports for the month of April.
Are those new assaults? Are they past assaults? What are those assaults?
I can get you that afterwards to break it all down for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's writing notes. Any other questions about crime in the back?
A report in the paper that subway robberies are up 17%.
Yeah, most of that increase was in the beginning of the year, but Chief Delatorre will speak about increase in robberies year to date in the subway system. Ed?
Yeah, so that's accurate. The robberies were up for the year to date. What happened was early in the year, the months of January, February, and March, we had increases in robbery, and they were basically in Manhattan. Since then, we moved some resources around, and for the month of April, we actually only had 5 robberies in Manhattan. And if you go back for the last 4 weeks, you'll see we've had only 1 a week. So Manhattan is now trending down significantly, and that's where we had our spike early in the year.
Robberies, what are we talking about? Are we still talking about people sleeping and their cell phones, or people running up on them and taking their money and belongings?
No, we're talking about, well, sometimes people sleeping and waking up, but when we talk about robberies, we're talking about the use of force. So in some cases, it could start out as a sleeping passenger, but there's always got to be a force element for it to be a robbery.
You know, with catching those people who are responsible for victimizing others.
Yeah, we've done a pretty good job. Actually, we've caught, out of 159 robberies that we've had in the system year to date, we have 123 arrests. So from case to case throughout, we have more than half of the robberies committed. So some of those are multiple perpetrators, but we have more than half the robberies committed in the system. We do have arrests. Sometimes they're live arrests. We have plainclothes officers deployed throughout the system, and sometimes it's a transit robbery squad that does the follow-up. We're getting great cooperation from the public, snapping those pictures of people on the subway when they do commit the robberies and the grand larcenies and the sex crimes, and that's also helping us an awful lot.
Hey, Dean, hold on, Rocco, just 1 second. Dean, so that's, just keep in mind, there's an 8% reduction in overall crime in the subway system, so that's 71 crimes. That's a significant decrease. And if there is a robbery on the transit system, either patrol, as Ed was talking about, maybe somebody in plain clothes will make an arrest on the spot. If not, we have a transit robbery squad in each and every borough in New York City to make sure that those crimes are fully investigated and those perpetrators are brought to justice. Rocco?
Chief, are any of those robberies part of patterns or they're individual robberies by and large?
They're individual robberies by and large. We had some patterns early in the year, but those patterns were not just transit patterns. We had robberies where we catch somebody and he was part of a pattern, say, topside up in the street as well. Okay.
Yeah. Commissioner, pulling it together, what do you think is the most important factor in these statistics and the direction they're heading?
I think the most important factor is working with all 8.5 million New Yorkers, quite frankly. I think neighborhood policing is paying off for us. It's paying off in crime reduction, and it is paying off in building trust. And as long as we continue to build that trust, people will come forward to report crimes, and people will also come forward to help us solve crimes. Dermot's people in the Detective Bureau, the precinct detective squads, the people assigned to narco, gang, vice, all the federal task forces that we have, we concentrate on that very small amount of people in New York City that are involved in violence and crime. That's been the strategy for 4 years now, and we continue to see a downward trend. But again, last week in Brownsville and a neighborhood up in the 4-8, up in the Bronx, and out in Far Rockaway, we did have an increase in shootings, and we have to be mindful of that each and every day. Zolan?
So speaking of shared responsibility, you talk about all the time, there's been a couple stories written about Dwayne Reed's and majority of larcenies, specifically Upper West Side, taking place in Dwayne Reed's. I went and talked to that precinct captain, and he's hoping that that company, Walgreens, invests in some more security outside. He's saying, you know, look, we need help. Do you feel like Walgreens is kind of holding up their end of the bargain when it comes to,
Terry, unless you want to talk about this, I haven't had any direct discussions with Walgreens, but if that's something that we need to talk about, I'll definitely.
Zolan, mostly with the Dwayne Reeds. We've been hitting very heavy with some organized crews that have been going up to Dwayne Reeds. So up in the 2-0 on the Lower West Side there, I know we've had a lot of issues. We have constant discussions with them on how they can prevent these larcenies from happening. And it's something that we're going to continue. They work with us, and they've made some improvements, and we're always looking to make better improvements.
clarify, I said Walgreens owns Dwayne Reed.
Does it? Okay. It's a Dwayne Reed stores. I read all those crime reports.
Are there any particular subway lines or subway stations that are hard hit for robberies?
Not currently, no.
Tony?
Commissioner, since you brought up neighborhood policing, I periodically ask this internal survey that you've been working on, that's been going on for some time. Are you any closer to getting it done, and is there any problem getting it out, or you're not getting the results that you expected?
I don't know. The results that we expected are the results that we would get. I'm not expecting any. I would hope that there's an increase in morale, an increase in trust. And we were briefed on the initial results of the internal survey, and in most areas it's positive. And at some point in the near future, we'll be able to share that with you. But right now, it was an executive level briefing. So it was good to see. Good to see the results. We had an overwhelming response to the survey. The statistical difference, it was plus or minus actually 0.46%. So the amount of people that responded to this survey was in and of itself a positive thing, a positive message to the police department. That's how much the men and women of the police department care about what they do. So at some point in the near future, we'll be able to share that with you. Not just yet, though, Tony. David?
Is there a new round of surveying that's going to go on, or what's going to happen between the release of whatever data you have now and what the public sees?
Yeah, this is something that we're not sure if it's going to be quarterly or every 6 months or every year, just to take the temperature of internally how the department is viewing their roles and responsibilities and the changes that we've asked them to undertake over the last 3 years. So this isn't just going to be one snapshot. This is something we have to do over time to make sure that we continue to move in the right direction.
What will be shared with the public? When will that be shared? What gets shared, I guess?
The results of the survey, where we are. I don't know what specific questions. Hopefully most of them, if not all of them, because we are a transparent police department. But at this point, we were just briefed on this recently over the last 2 weeks. Rocco?
Chief, back in February when DA Vance announced his new policy toward prosecuting or not prosecuting most fare evasion cases, you raised some concerns about 2 arrests that had taken place some days earlier, both of them involving people that your office, obviously, you saw as public safety threats. That dialogue between your office and the DA's office about who falls under that category and who should and should not be prosecuted, where is that at this point?
It's still a work in progress. We're getting closer. As you did in your newspaper pointed out, there's a reduction in fare evasion arrests year to date, and there was also an increase in robberies in the beginning of the year. Is there a direct correlation? We can't say that just yet. But our definition of a public safety threat and Cy Vance's definition still differs, but we're working to make sure we close that gap to keep the people that ride that subway safe each and every day. And I think it's, what's the number per day, index crimes per day?
We average about between 6 and 7 crimes a day with a ridership of roughly 6 million a day. Sometimes it exceeds 6 million, so we're talking about 1 crime per million people per day. And if you're looking at robberies, by the way, we had 1 robbery per day in the month of April for the whole system.
In a fare evasion arrests and summonses, how would you explain that? The Chief Delatorre yesterday described a change in tactics where police were being posted further away from turnstiles. That might be a factor.
Yeah, about half the, and Eddie, you can go into this a little bit more detail. About half the crime is taking place on the trains, and half the crime is taking place on the subway stations, the mezzanines, the platforms. So we have to make sure that we're constantly looking at deployment. We did move more people to train patrol. We have nighttime train patrol now too. So that moved some of the people away from the turnstile area too. So Ed, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, and that nighttime train patrol goes to address the sleeping passenger issue. We were seeing a lot of sleeping passenger grand larcenies. So we've deployed a large number of officers on the midnights that go throughout the entire city to stay on the same line, going through the different boroughs and through the different transit districts. And those officers obviously are there to be there till about 6 a.m. and wake up any of those sleeping passengers and let them know that they're at risk if they fall asleep.
Let's do 2 or 3 more, please.
Marcia?
I wonder if Chief Shea could tell us what role his detectives are playing in the investigation.
In which investigation? Yeah, so I learned of it yesterday, almost immediately. I was in communication. That's the first I had heard of it. Almost immediately was in contact with the Manhattan DA's office. I did speak to Cy Vance myself this morning. Both the Manhattan DA's office and the NYPD had not received to this point any complaints from any of the individuals mentioned in the report, but as everyone has made perfectly clear, it's obviously a troubling report. We will be reaching out in conjunction with the Manhattan DA's office to the potential victims mentioned in that report, and the investigation will go forward from there.
All right, so crime questions still? Yep.
Do the victims need to file a report or press charges in order for you to go forward with a criminal case?
Yeah, we would need a victim to go forward and make a report, but obviously it's incumbent on us at learning the potential for that, reading that article. We'll take the forward step of reaching out to them, and then we'll go from there.
Has the statute of limitations lapsed as far as you know, or is it still within?
I don't want to comment on anything. What I know is probably what you know, and what I read is not always accurate. So we'll conduct an investigation. We'll interview them personally. We tend to get more information when we do it face-to-face like that, and then we'll go from there.
Tony.
For Chief Pollack, the uptick you saw in homicides, is that tracked or closely tracked to the other violence trends you saw an uptick in, like in Williamsburg and other places? Was there any cluster to the increase?
The Bronx had seen an increase. That was where the increase was concentrated.
John.
I just wanted to ask Chief Shea about a homicide in the Seminole precinct. You have someone in custody being
All right, so
questioned.
we're moving on from, we're moving on from crime stats? Okay, yes, sir.
Relatedly, Chief Pollack, on homicides, you mentioned that homicides are up, but shooting incidents were down. If it's not shooting incidents, gun violence, driving, homicides, are you seeing any other particular cause in murder cases?
Gang violence, gang activity is the driver right now. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Well, Bronx had seen an increase for the month of April.
Hey, Lori, do you have a breakdown of homicide by what weapon? Was it a stabbing? Was it shooting? I think that's what you're driving at here? Yeah, okay. And if you don't, we can get that to you.
Yeah, we'll get that. It was more shooting violence as opposed to stabbing in the month of April, but I'll give you the exact numbers at the end.
All right, moving on. More police-related topics?
The spike of attacks in Jews recently in Crown Heights. Is this a specific increase in hate crimes? Is it a headline hate crime? How is it being addressed by the department?
Dermot, do you have the current hate crime numbers? We are actually down for the year. hate crime numbers?
Yeah, I can give you the specifics at the end. Significant drop-off. The majority of our hate crime statistics generally come from anti-Semitic, and that's the case again this year. But really across the board, we're seeing significant drops this year, and that's a good thing, but still too many, quite frankly, of all types. But the good news is in 2018, we're trending down in hate crimes in New York City.
John?
Is this with a 7-0? You have someone in custody for homicide?
Yeah, so about 6 p.m. yesterday, we were called to the basement of 155 Stratford Avenue in the 7-0 precinct, where we encountered a male, white, 66, that ultimately passed away from numerous stab wounds. Still early in sorting out the details of this case, but we do in fact have a person in custody. And we're trying to, at this point, determine really what the motive was of this incident. It appears at this time that there was in some way a known-to relationship between these individuals in the past.
How do they know each other?
Preliminary at this point, but there are reports that the deceased was a professor and the individual in custody may have been a former student. But that's, again, that's preliminary and subject to change.
Can you speak to last night's incident where a civilian was attacked allegedly by Cardi B's bodyguards?
Yeah, so we do have a report of an assault in the 19th precinct. Occurred about 2:15 in the morning. What we have is a video that was made aware to us of an individual that I've seen myself. Essentially, it shows an individual having a loud, boisterous, I'll call it, conversation with the entourage of allegedly Cardi B. At some point, 3 individuals run over and physically assault this individual. Difficult to ascertain on the video, but what you see is essentially somebody punch, the individual goes down, and then there's a flurry of either additional punches or a kick to that individual. So 19th Precinct Detective Squad currently has that case, and that's where we're at right now.
Are you reaching out to her entourage?
We will be interviewing all parties as well as witnesses involved in the incident.
In the video, do you see Cardi B? Is that you can see her in this video?
I did not.
If the entourage has fled the city or if they've flown to wherever they may be today, how do you proceed to continue investigating that?
I think it's been proven over time we have a very long reach and a very long memory. So I have the utmost confidence that if there was, in fact, a crime committed, which apparently there was, we will bring whoever is responsible to justice. And if I could, I'll point out a case just hours ago, a perfect case to highlight that. Very good news for the residents of Queens, where just hours ago in Columbia, South Carolina, we apprehended or are in the process of bringing back the individual that was involved in that horrific assault in the 107 precinct last week. So I have confidence, the utmost confidence in my detectives as well as our partners, and a special thanks to the marshals for our help in that case. Correct.
Marco?
Chief, could you elaborate on that? And just to clarify on Schneiderman, I know you said the 4 women who were in the article have not previously come forward, but have any other women come forward since the publication of the article?
Not as of yet, no, Rocco.
107, could you fill us
The
in on?
107, just earlier this morning in a motel in Columbia, South Carolina, we apprehended without incident the individual that we were looking for the 107 case. He's being brought back as we speak on a probation violation, and that will continue as we go forward.
Ashley?
Thank you. Chief, in the 7-0, back to the 7-0 homicide, can you tell us more about what he did before he went into the home, and if it appears that he broke in or he was let in by the professor?
I don't want to get too much into the details of the case, and there are a number of details. What I will say at this point in time is that it appears, or we're at least getting reports, that I'm confident in saying there was some sort of knowledge between the parties in that house and this individual. The exact nature of what he was doing, I'll stay away from at this point in time.
There's a report that he spoke to the professor's daughter right before entering the home.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on that.
Yeah, sir.
Let's go back to subway enforcement briefly, if Chief Bellator is still here. So there's a lawsuit that's currently before the appellate division that's challenging the transit recidivist policy as unconstitutional. There's a brief by several community advocacy groups, Community Service Society, Legal Aid, that argues the policy, because it relies on past arrests that may have been dismissed or otherwise disposed of, it violates the state stealing law, and also there's an argument there that it exacerbates kind of racial disparities in policing that already exist. I wonder if one of y'all could just confirm for me the transit recidivist criteria again, and also just kind of respond to those claims in the lawsuit, or this brief.
So I didn't hear the last part of your question. You want to know what the transit recidivist criteria are?
Yeah, that's one part.
So there's a couple different ways you can become a transit recidivist. The first 3 times you jump the turnstile, you don't get a criminal summons or an arrest unless you have an open warrant. You get a civil tab summons. There's no record of that. There's no fingerprint. You pay your civil fine, and that's the end of it. The 4th time you jump the turnstile, that's when you would get arrested for the state misdemeanor crime of theft of services. If you've committed a felony in the last year in the transit system, not a felony up top, but in the transit system, you can be a transit recidivist. Obviously, if we stop you for jumping the turnstile and you have an open warrant, we're going to satisfy that warrant, and you also need to have identification to get both the tab summons and the criminal summons. With respect to the appeal, we're confident that the appellate court is going to rule in our favor. We're not going to comment further on pending litigation.
Any other police-related questions? Okay.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
Police-related question? Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Just wanted to see how you feel about the plan to have those force supervised injection facilities open.
The overdose prevention centers. So this is a subject that we had to take our time and make sure that we thought this out. It couldn't be just a quick reaction. We actually sent people to Toronto. We sent people to Vancouver. Listen, we had in 2016, we had 1,400 people die of overdose deaths in New York. Most of those were opioid-related. In 2017, that number is predicted, that we don't have final numbers yet for 17, but that's probably going to go up by 5%. There's many ways the NYPD is involved in reducing opioid overdoses. And I think with overdose prevention centers, we had to keep, quite frankly, we had to keep an open mind. And it's important that we do. We do a lot now, but I think we need to do more. We need to do as much as possible, because if that's your brother, your sister, your son or daughter, I'm not sure if you want them overdosing at home or overdosing in an alleyway. There's got to be, we got to think outside the box here. And there's a lot of issues that go along with this. There are crime issues that we saw up in Canada. There's quality of life issues. But rest assured, if these centers, and when they open up, and the mayor and I have had long discussions about this, there will be an NYPD presence, and the issues that we saw in other places, specifically up in Toronto and Vancouver, it won't be replicated in New York City. But it is important that we keep an open mind and try to save a few lives moving forward. I think it's worth going through with this pilot project. Open up. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Man possibly assaulted by Cardi B's entourage has been accused of assaulting or hounding at least other celebrities. Do we know if he has any kind of past criminal?
I don't know, Dermot, did you get that? We're back to
Can you repeat the question?
Record at all? He's been accused of hounding celebs in the past.
Yeah, I've heard probably the same rumors, but nothing that I would feel confident saying I can substantiate at this time.
Okay, we're going to other topics. Any topics now? Looking at David.
So I wanted to ask you on the affairs issue. Definitely the council. A lot of questions came in for your budget director. I wanted to ask you two sort of related questions. One, why are you willing to subsidize a $660 sort of subsidy per ride on the ferry without a millionaire's tax, yet you want one for the subsidy for the subway. Why is it okay to do the subsidy for the ferries without a millionaire's tax?
They're two totally different things. The ferry system is run by the City of New York. It would never exist if it weren't for the City of New York. And we had to create more and better mass transit options. Hey, everybody, keep it down. That means you, Monahan.
He doesn't know how to whisper.
I'd like that man arrested right there. So we have to create more mass transit options. We had no illusion that the MTA would do that. Something we could do quickly. We could serve a lot of people, as you know. The initial projected ridership has been greatly, greatly exceeded. And this is just the beginning of something that could have a much bigger ramification for the city. Meanwhile, I think the fair fare idea is the right idea. What I've said from the beginning is, because it involves the MTA, we have an opportunity to address the MTA situation overall and to cover the cost of the fair fare through the millionaire's tax proposal I made last year. With a number of other advocates, legislators who agreed with that, there were some doubting Thomases about the political possibilities. I argue strenuously it was always something that was going to be very popular. The Quinnipiac poll that came out last month proved that. But beyond that, the situation in Albany has changed radically in just the last few weeks. So I think this is a viable option. If you put millionaire's tax up against congestion pricing or commuter tax, and trying to determine which one's the most viable in the new Albany, I would argue it's going to be millionaire's tax. That'll allow us to get a long-term funding stream into the MTA and cover the fair fare on an ongoing basis. And my central concern, after the state just took most of $500 million from the city for the MTA, is I don't want to see recurrent efforts by the state to take money out of the MTA, and I don't want to see the city obligated to additional expenses to the MTA that will add to our fiscal burden when the real answer here is to come up with a sustained funding source for MTA. It can't be a constant turn to the city treasury.
Follow up on the transit piece. So critics have sort of said that your transit policy is sort of limited to the ferries and the EQX and PATH, which haven't been built yet. I mean, how would you describe your philosophy of transit in New York City?
Maximum options and a heavy focus on the places that have not been served sufficiently. So they'll come together. Look, the way I look at it, you've got the traditional MTA, subways and buses. You've got select bus service, ferries, light rail, and city bike and things like city bike. We used to just have the traditional options of subways and buses. What became abundantly clear is that there's not going to be any appreciable new subway lines in this city. We saw how long it took to just do a piece of the Second Avenue subway. So if you get to core philosophy, and I always appreciate that question, my core philosophy is I'd love to see a more extensive subway system, but I'm not living in a fantasy land. That would take decades and decades. What can we do? Select bus service, we have already enthusiastically embraced. A lot of expansion during my first term. We now project 21 more lines. That's tremendously efficient. A lot of riders, speeds the trips up a lot. City Bike started before me, has continued to expand during my time. Also something that is giving a lot of people an option they didn't have and expanding to a lot of places that didn't have good options. So that unites both of those, the select bus service, City Bike, both reaching a lot of places that were underserved, giving people more options. Light rail, the initial vision that's put forward covers an area that's growing very intensely. A lot of underserved areas within it, a lot of public housing residents who don't have sufficient service. I think it fits that model exactly, and again, something the MTA would never do on its own. And then finally, the ferry service has amazing potential because it specifically reaches a lot of underserved areas. The Rockaways, Red Hook, Soundview, these are all classically underserved areas that happen to be on the water, and a water solution actually works great for them. The response has been amazing. We want to keep building those out. So I think the city believing in diversification, we believe in economic diversification. We believe in diversifying our economy. My predecessor, Michael Bloomberg, did as well. I think that's smart policy. Well, I would argue there's a strong parallel with mass transit. Diversify your options. But in the meantime, fix the MTA. Two central concepts. One, a sustainable funding source. which is going to take political courage. I mentioned 3 obvious options. It's got to be one of those or some combination to be viable. It's time for everyone in Albany to make the decision. And second, holding the MTA accountable. I mean, we just saw what happened with East Side Access. You guys rightfully hold my feet to the fire. If I showed up one day and said, oh, the thing that's been delayed years and years is going to be delayed longer and I'm throwing on another $1 billion, you'd hold me accountable. Well, MTA needs to be held accountable. Our board members will. Other board members who are independent are doing that. And we specifically said with the Subway Action Plan, okay, we put the money in, now prove to us it's actually being used effectively. I think that's the shape of things to come, a much greater level of accountability held for the MTA going forward. Yes?
Hard Island's been in the news lately because of exposure of human remains, erosion, and storm damage. Two-part question is, have you given any thought to fast-tracking some of the federal funding that you have in the kitty to expedite those repairs to the shoreline? And there's some proposals being reintroduced, perhaps tomorrow, to spread out or transfer jurisdiction over the island from corrections to, say, parks and recreation to sort of diversify the ability to cope with the situation. Do you have any answers to that?
I'm concerned about the situation. I want to see it addressed. I do not start with the assumption that changing agencies will lead to a faster solution. A lot of times when you change agencies, it actually slows things down. So my mandate to the Department of Corrections is to fix the situation and to draw on existing resources, and I will certainly do everything I can to support them in that. So I'll get more specifics for you, but we have to address it. Other questions? Yes?
On the topic of 58, it's May, the legislative session ends in June. I'm wondering when you're going and when you're going to Albany and what kind of lobbying muscle you're putting behind efforts to repeal the law. And then I have a second question on a specific legal matter.
Sure. On 50A, well, it began back in February with my testimony, and we've been talking to legislative leaders and members ever since on how to get it done. There's obviously, this is something that has strong views on all sides. That's not a surprise. We're going to do a major final push here. I don't know what to expect from this legislative session in general. Sometimes in an election year, there is an impulse to do a lot of things, and sometimes in an election year, there's an impulse to do very little in Albany. I don't know which one we're dealing with yet. But we are going to do a major push. I'd like to get something done this year. Again, the world changed intensely in the last few weeks. If we do not get something done this year, we're going to go back into, I think, a much better environment for action less than a year from now. What is your second?
Specific question. Last month, in arguments before the first department, a city lawyer said that the city, when it pulled the clipboards from CPI, just didn't know for 40 years that they were releasing these records in violation of the law. And Commissioner Kelly said in December 2016 that that's not the case, that he had tried to remove the clipboards and that he had been told by the law department, his lawyers, that he could not because that would violate the law. And that had been discussed in this case that was being argued before the first department. So my question to you is, why is the city advancing this false narrative about when it became aware of this, that these records allegedly violated 50A?
I disagree with your framing of the question, respectfully, because this is the first time hearing of the history as you recount it. The history, as I understood it, was because of a FOIL request. It led to both the legal staff here at the department and at the law department to look at the situation. They came jointly to the conclusion that there was a problem and it had to be addressed. Again, the real answer here is to get legislative relief. And this commissioner, his predecessor, and I are united in wanting a change in the law that will create the transparency everyone wants and once and for all settle the question.
If you have the former police commissioner saying this is in fact not the case, then I don't understand.
Respectfully.
This is a published account. I don't understand how the city wasn't aware of his.
One, I have not seen it. I'm just speaking to me. I can't speak for everyone else. I've never seen or heard that before. Two, the former police commissioner also questioned whether the crime statistics under Commissioner Bratton were being kept properly, and I think that was proven to be a fallacy on his part. So I'm sorry, what he says is not gospel truth. But if there is new information, I certainly want to know it. I want to understand what the ramifications are, but I'm answering you very specifically. The decision was made by the lawyers of both agencies based on a FOIL request.
I understand. You bring up his questioning of the crime stats, and I think it's different to question what someone else is doing than to say what you did personally. And he's saying what he did personally.
Again, first time hearing it. David?
Just to get back on the transit thing, I mean, can you imagine a scenario in which you carve out a deal with the city council to fund fair fares this year?
I don't do hypotheticals, David. You know that. We are in conversation with the city council on a whole host of items in their budget response. One of the important items in their budget response we actually put into the executive budget, which was the fair student funding money. But there's a lot that we're discussing, and we have to figure out how we're going to handle it between now and adoption.
The millionaire's tax is a hypothetical.
I don't think a millionaire's tax is a hypothetical in the least. I really don't. But the point is, I've put forward a vision a year ago and said, here's how you solve the problem. So, I appreciate if you think that is somehow clever, but let me offer this. There has to be a decision in Albany on the future funding of the MTA. If we could make that decision, we would make it. We don't get to make it. As I said, I think there's only 3 specific paths. I have not heard another one. I think from day one, the millionaire's tax, because it was specifically for New York, directed at New York City millionaires and billionaires, we were not asking suburbanites to pay, and I honestly thought for a lot of the suburban legislators that would make it more palatable. I think it was a viable idea from the beginning. I think it's been made more viable by proof of its public popularity. I think it's been made more viable by political changes in Albany, and I think it's the best way to solve the problem. Yes?
Have you made any decision at this point about releasing those emails that the court ordered last week? Have you decided if you're going to attempt to appeal that, or if not, when?
Exactly where I was a few days ago. We're looking at the court's judgment. We're going to come to a final decision soon, and we'll certainly announce it then. Yeah.
Is there any update that you can give on the investigation into?
There you are.
Into the death of Cindy Bassel from the NYPD, and any indication of when you would, or if you will, release names of the police officers who were involved in that?
I don't have an update for you. I'll get you one. The AG's office is investigating that, so we'll have to get an update for you.
Okay, did I see one more back there? Last one.
Go ahead. So we're more than halfway toward the deadline, I should say, for the city to pick an emergency manager for NYCHA. I'm wondering what sort of meetings you've had with the council speakers, tenant advocates, how many, and kind of where the process stands.
Yeah, I've spoken to the council speaker several times on it. Staff have been meeting on it. There's been conversations with the resident leadership. There's still plenty of time to resolve it. That being said, we still have profound concerns about the executive order itself, and we're working to address those. And of course, simultaneously, there is a process going on with the Southern District that we remain hopeful is going to lead to a settlement.
Are there any names on the table at this point in terms of?
Not time to talk about names yet. It's a very, an initial positive conversation. When we get to a point where we have a name or names to talk about, we'll certainly make that public. Thanks, everyone.